It's the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast, where we talk about all things consensual non-monogamy, polyamory, open relationships, swinging, and how you can have secure and sexy relationships, no matter how you do them. Now here's your hosts, Tara and André.
Hey, André.
Hey, Tara. Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast with Tara and André. So today, our topic is the 5 steps to have a holly poly day, little punny there, and start 2025 feeling secure. Let's start with some introductions, because if people haven't heard us before, they might want to know who we are.
Good idea.
So I am Tara Lynn Franco. I am a relationship and awesomeness coach, and I help support people who are navigating non-monogamy.
You certainly do. That's a mouthful. And I am André Turcotte. I'm a sex-positive psychotherapist.
And so we are the co-founders of an online community of the same name as our podcast, Let's Talk Polyamory, on Facebook. And we started that like a long time ago, like during the pandemic, and it's been going since then. And because our passion is to really help people create healthy relationships and navigate non-monogamy in a way that feels awesome and secure, and, you know, and make it a little easier to navigate those rough bits that come up from time to time. We've had a few rough bits, eh, André?
Yeah, we've stepped in it a couple of times, and somehow we've always made it out, thankfully, because of some of the research we've done, being, I guess, therapists and coach ourselves, and also the love of our community, we have found ways. But really, the idea is that we'd like to offer you a way of avoiding stepping it the way we have. So we're sharing that experience with you and the experience of others.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're not a member of our group, please join us there. It's a great place to ask questions, participate in discussion, and connect with others in the community and have a safe space to have those discussions. I think that's an important part because it is a private community. And I think sometimes people are worried that if they join and they're not out to family and friends, that they might be discovered. But unless they're in the group already, they will not see you in there. It doesn't come up as your groups that you're in or anything like that.
It makes me think back to some of the concerns that people have when they want to go to a sex club, for example, and they're afraid, well, what happens if I see somebody that I know in there? And well, they're in there, they will have recognized you, won't recognize them. They'd have the same consideration. But yeah, maybe it is different when we're not out to family and friends, and how would they come to accept it or not? And we'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, for sure. Like one of the other things we do, and because we discovered through the community that there was a need for this, we also have started creating programs specifically to support people in their journey. And so, because I mean, we're recording this just in December. The holidays are approaching us. And for many, including myself, the holidays are both exciting and can be challenging. And so, if you want to use some of the time, if you have time off from work, to kind of make things a little more jolly for you, we invite you to take a look at our Poly Newbies digital course, which is completely self-driven. So you can fit it in between those times. And, it will help you navigate the holidays a little bit better, give you some tools in your tool belt to make it a bit easier. So you have that content as soon as you sign up and for 6 months. So you can take your time, or you can do as much as you can while you're on the holidays. Because, people often have a goal in the new year to make things better. And so that's one way you can do that. So it's a little bit of a gift to yourself and your relationships.
It is well timed, right? Because as you say, this is being recorded during the holiday time that many people are celebrating, depending on which religion you might be subscribing to. And as you say, it may be exciting and challenging on its own, but added to that, what is it like when you are polyamorous or queer, or however you might express yourself, that is not within those norms or traditional values, let's say.
Yeah, I think sometimes it can make you feel like a little bit alone. When I first came out to my family, that was in April, but I think the first holidays was Christmas. It was actually a little bit tricky because I had to be there with that knowledge that they knew something about me that they didn't agree with. And, it was really uncomfortable. So anyway, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, which leads us to today's topic, how to have a holly poly day and start 2025 feeling secure. Before we jump into it, There are some people watching us live record. We do live record to Facebook. So that's one of the benefits of joining the community and being part of that. But you can also comment if you're listening to this on the podcast, Spotify specifically. We would love to know from you what you're excited about or worried about over the holidays. So please share in the comments. That would be awesome. What do you think about the holidays, Andre? I know you're not like a super holiday kind of guy.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. You're right. I'm not a big super holiday guy, especially holidays, I guess, that are kind of steeped in organized religion. So I don't subscribe to an organized religion, but it's interesting that we do have these legally recognized holidays, these days that are indicated. And somebody like me who doesn't subscribe to organized religion, neither agnostic or atheist, but if I didn't have these holidays, when would I then be invited to celebrate these? So even if you don't necessarily believe in all of the history of it or the tradition of it, maybe it is good still to have some little mark on the calendar that might invite us to do the things these holidays are supposed to do. And I think those intentions are to reflect and to gather and to come together and to have gratitude, to share, to do all those wonderful things. And I think that is universal, regardless of your orientation or your subscription to these organized things. But as you know, I don't participate in them. And sometimes as a result, that may leave me feeling a little bit isolated because I'm not participating that way. So I find things to do. Thank you, Tara, for helping me find ways to support myself during these things. So rather than just waking up one day and say, oh, this is the 25th of December and being taken by surprise, I have now implemented a lot of things because of your good coaching that help to with these times. Well, I'm serious. So I will, it's tried and true, it's effective, and that's why it works. And that's why I'm participating. I've seen it firsthand. So I will implement certain things to help support myself and not feel so isolated. Some people may get off on that and say, well, finally have a break from everybody and I can be without that. But we choose to either participate or not. And if we're not wanting to participate in that and not wanting to feel lonely in being alone, there are definitely things that we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the 25th is just today, right? And so celebrating all different times is actually one way of doing it. So we'll actually talk about that too.
I just had a thought. I was thinking about it and saying about the 25th, right? So we're indicating Christianity here, right? But what if we are Muslim or Jewish or any other thing, and it's not on that 25th? So as somebody who supports the 25th, that's my thing. Let's say, well, how do I feel about other religions and their time of doing it, about Ramadan or about Passover, all those things? So do I have a tolerance and able to recognize them? And then the question is, for sure. And then the question is, if I'm able to do that as a good Christian, for example, and recognize these other ones, even if I don't subscribe to it, can we still invite that same incorporation, that same recognition in other people's lifestyles and sexual identities? So if a person happens to be polyamorous or monogamous or queer or straight or whatever it is, can I be accepting of them? And is that my right to get at them, or should it be an expectation? Hey, you might not subscribe to it, but don't yuck my yum.
Absolutely.
So to see how we might be reminded or invited to have this kind of not only tolerance, but support of the other person and the joy for them that they might enjoy this. And it's lovely for them.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good time to also learn about what's going on in other cultures, other faith-based religions. And yeah, like you said, celebrate. And I'm all for celebrating.
I'm sorry, you're igniting me. We don't have these things already in the calendar. If we're not subscribing to them, then what about the agnostic and the atheist and the other people who might not check off any of those boxes? Should we make a day for ourselves? I mean, we have Polyamory Day. It's passed a few weeks ago, but I wonder where we could then invite this celebration and feel as though we have a time for ourselves as well. Because we might say, well, Christmas isn't for me. Hanukkah's not for me. Ramadan's not for me. Where do I get my time? When could I invite friends and family and loved ones to be able to reflect on this? Maybe we should start with.
Maybe you should start that day. Make a campaign. Pick a day.
All right, let's figure it out.
Okay. Well, for some people, this is a general holiday season and usually means even if you're agnostic or even atheist, you probably have friends or family or people that celebrate something during this time. So it means time spent with friends, lovers, family, and also can mean a bunch of other things. So tough choices on where to be and when and who to be with, how to deal with family members that don't necessarily agree with your choices or partners or your orientation or even your religion, if it's not theirs, or non-religion. Jesus misses me, apparently. How to de-stress and prioritize sexy fun in between all the holiday obligations, because it's a busy time. So needing to set aside time for yourself and have enjoyment as well and pleasure. So, and if anything at all feels shaky in your relationships and in your non-monogamy journey, this is probably the time where those issues could be highlighted because of all those factors. Like there's a lot going on, it's busy, or probably you might be running from place to place. You're seeing people that maybe not necessarily agree with your choices, right? So we wanted to share with you 5 things you can do to get yourself up for success for the holidays and, make 2025 feel a little more secure, or at least make things feel a little bit better. So for the holidays. All right. Let's start with number 1.
Number 1 is to reflect, right? So we take time to review the year, right? Our year in review, and we reflect on the past year, but we also might look at some of the wins that we had, not just things that went sideways or south. There's always some opportunity to look at what things did go well and build upon that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think I just recently retold you the story of how I started doing a year in review. And part of that was kind of reviewing all the amazing things that happened over that past year. Also reflecting on the things that were challenging and why they might have been challenging. So if somebody's navigating non-monogamy for the first time, or something has come up that has caused you to have some strong feelings, it's a good time to sit down and reflect on that and what might be behind that and how anything else that's going on might be influencing it. And, just take some time to reflect.
Yeah, I really love that first step that we do reflect upon it, because we have had that year and what was working well and what worked less well, and wonderful for the things that worked well. But can we look at, say, for example, my feelings of jealousy or what I identify as jealousy? Upon investigation, maybe I find out, well, it's actually an indicator of my level of insecurity or whatever it might be. In taking time to reflect it, I can acknowledge these things, and then I can say, well, there is room for improvement. These are things that could stand some attention. But it's wonderful to have the conversation about this, to take the pause for it, to reflect, because otherwise, I'll speak personally, I may find them just going from week to week and going along that way and trying my best each step along the way. But when I stop to reflect upon it, I can chart some of the progress and I can see where there might be a deficit, and I can really focus my attention there. But again, also recognizing what good has happened in that last year and build upon that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that might come up, and maybe part of the reason you might have felt feelings of jealousy and insecurity, is around unmet needs. And so that's kind of where number 2 comes in, is once you've done that reflection and making sure that you set up time to do a check-in or review, a relationship check-in, and to assess the health and dynamics of your connections, anything that's unmet, etc. And one of the things that we teach in our Poly Newbies course, but also our Open Relationship and Polyamory Mastery program, is the RADAR method.
There it is. Perfect.
So this is influenced by a version that was created by Multi-Amory podcast. And we added an extra A because we felt it was super important. So these are kind of the main steps in it. And we're not going to go into them in detail, but we'll go over them really quickly. So the first part is review. And, if you've done your reflection, then doing a review of what's kind of gone on. And I always suggest that you do this yourself first, how you feel about how things are going in your relationship, and then doing that with your partner. And the important part of this step is to kind of keep it to factual things. Like even if you had feelings about things and that sort of thing, it's more like, here's the things that happened this year. Like, I got a new partner, you got a new partner, or I broke up with somebody, or we went to a destination thing, or whatever it is, and review all the things, because that's the foundation upon which you will do number 2, which is decide on the agenda. You might have a standing agenda of certain things you cover every time. And we always suggest that you do have that. And, and one of the things that you may always discuss on your agenda is your values-based relationship agreement. And that's important. But you can also talk about things like, what's our relationship style, and is it working, and what's not working, and that sort of thing. And if you've already done a relationship review, you can review the action plan that came from the previous one. So we'll talk about one in a second. So do you want to do the next A, the additional A, affirm and connect?
Yeah. We might mention some affirmations, things that we are recognizing that are working well in our relationship, values or traits that we admire in our partners, and we'll talk about it. But you know, Tara, I was struck by one thing that we said, and this is how we recommend that we do this, is, as you said, we review on our own first, right? We assemble our own tally sheet. But it's also interesting in this exercise, once we've done that, we could just, on a little kind of on the ledger, on the side note, we could also ask ourselves, what do I imagine my partner will respond? What did they think went well and went less well?
Yeah.
Are we well aligned there? So I thought everything was fine this year, and I thought, it was the best year ever. And meanwhile, maybe you were thinking it was a little bit different. So am I in tune to that? So it's wonderful to rejoice and to recognize all these great things, but where does it align with my partner, and how do they actually feel about this? And where do we align as well? So it's good to know we have our own self-reflection, but then we invite our other person and we have consideration of what they might have on their list as well.
That's a great point, to think about what they may think. Because say, for example, I had a new partner and everything went amazing and all that stuff. My partner, in this example, might be like, yeah, well, that wasn't very good. You were out a lot. You didn't connect with me. You didn't, so thinking about what they might have felt about, my connection or things I experienced or their own personal experiences is important to do in that reflection. So thanks for bringing that up.
That's a great example, right? Let's say, for example, you did get a new partner and you may be overjoyed with that, as you should be, and you're experiencing all that NRE, whereas your partner, me in this case, maybe I felt, well, I was kind of secondary. My position had shifted somehow, and it left me feeling not as fuzzy, right? So maybe that's something that we talk about. How could I still be recognized, or what has changed? All those good things. It's really about the idea of inviting conversation rather.
Yeah, perfect. So the affirm and connection stage, and why we put it here before we jump into the discussion, is that sometimes these discussions are a bit difficult, right? So I love what you said about doing affirmations, and we have an affirmation that we suggest for people before they start any sort of discussions. It sets you up feeling good, but also connecting with each other. I liked how you said about having some appreciation for the other person. And we actually have an exercise called I Appreciate. That's probably good to do here. So having some time to reconnect and feel good before you're jumping into that discussion. And so sometimes this process of doing this relationship review might take a little longer. So then when you do get into discussion, I think I already mentioned this, one of the things you may be looking at is your values-based agreement. And so this is something that we suggest people set up in their relationships, and so that everybody is consenting to the same thing. But it's not a point in time activity. Like once you have one agreement, you're like, okay, that's it. That's how we're doing it. You know what I mean? It's something to look at and review, and ensure that it still aligns with your personal and your relationship values, reflects the type of relationship you have, and still meets your needs, and adjust it where needed. So at your quarterly or more frequent, bigger relationship review or end of year review, this is something that you may want to look at. And then you're discussing the other things on the agenda as well, taking your time, taking breaks if needed, making sure that you're employing active listening, which we're going to talk about in a second too, and really hearing what your partner has to say. Super important.
Yeah, it's a wonderful time to bring up those things that we feel might be more difficult or difficult at all to bring up otherwise, because this is already set. We already have an invitation to this. This is an agreed time on our calendar where we're going to talk about the state of the relationship. And it might sound kind of foreign and kind of even pre-calculated, I guess you'd say, but it really does invite the possibility to table new things on the agenda. So we might say, well, how do we feel about this agreement that we had in the past? And has it shifted at all? Maybe in the past we gave it a 3 and now it's feeling like a 7. This would be a perfect opportunity for us to say, well, I might have felt that way previously, but now I think I've changed. And it could go one way or the other. But really, it is the invitation for us to express our real feelings about this and how we might want to maintain certain things, or certain things may need to be modified.
Yeah, absolutely. And it may be that if you've opened an existing relationship, for example, that the relationship agreement might be a lot more rigorous. There might be a lot more under each value, things that you do and say to align with that agreement. But as time goes by, one of the positive things might be is you might say that thing is maybe not as important anymore. There's definitely things in our agreement that I know that will stay forever, like everything having to do with valuing our sexual health, but things like consideration, which is one of our values, which we have some things under there around, informing about upcoming dates and stuff like that. I think we're a little less rigorous maybe than we used to be. When we first started, we were like 2 days notice, but now we're like, yeah, give as much notice as possible. But if an opportunity comes up, let's just talk about it. And, usually it's totally figure outable. And I mean, I don't think I have strong feelings about it now, but that's because I feel more comfortable that all these other things are in place, So there's always positive things too. Like it's not necessarily you're going to tighten down more, you might loosen up more. And that might change from year to year, from review to review,
I concur entirely. I think that we do feel more secure. So that does make us feel perhaps more relaxed in some of the areas. But maybe it's not the case with everybody, especially if they've not been practicing these things. They may actually feel less secure and want to have even more agreements, or what some can say restrictions put upon it. But that is generally, in our experience, seen as people who have not been participating in these formats, in these recommendations that we lay forward. As a monitor for ourselves, if I'm feeling less secure, what's informing that? What's driving that? Is it because I've been doing the work as unlikely, or is it because other things are going sideways and I'm not really addressing them? That's generally the case, right?
Yeah. And I think sometimes when you first start with this stuff, you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know necessarily what you're going to need, or you don't know that a certain situation is going to come up. I think it's awesome to brainstorm what you think might come up and how you might feel, but we can't always catch it, which is why it's super important to have an agreement and then have a place to review it regularly.
Which naturally then goes into our next letter, which would be A for action. So it's great to talk about these things or think about them, but many people would say actions speak loudest. So what are we going to do? What is our action plan going to look like?
Yeah, exactly. So an action plan can be like updating your relationship agreement. It could look like, especially if a partner has a new connection or something like that, it might mean that maybe we need more quality time together and need to be very specific about that. And there could be things like that. So identifying any actions you feel will make things better on an ongoing basis.
Better or maintain what's going well too, right? Because maybe the action isn't just about fixing what's not going well, but how do we maintain it? So everything's going well with us. I don't think it's not that important to go on dates anymore. I don't think it's that important to woo you or to be seductive or flirtatious or all these things, because everything's working fine. And do I then suddenly start taking things for granted, as opposed to saying, this is a time to reflect. Oh, and I remember their love language is words of affirmation. Let me make sure that I am able to offer them that, because I consider their feeling well part of my feeling well. So what can I do to help support the good things that are happening in this? Not just putting out fires, but maintaining good protocol, maintaining good loving relationships.
Yeah, that's a great point. And something came up for us recently because I've been really busy with a lot of new things going on. And I'll admit that I haven't been as attentive to our relationship, and I've been prioritizing work. So it's not always other relationships that are impacting your relationship. It can be other factors, and work is always a big factor for people. And so making sure you set aside time to do special things together is like super important, and maintaining those things, not taking them for granted. I mean, I think one of the common things I hear from people when they're kind of struggling, when they've opened up a relationship and somebody has new partners or that sort of thing, is that they'll say, one partner will say, like, I just feel like not important anymore, or I'm not a priority. And the other person might say, but I'm here all the time. I'm here with you all the time. We live together, we eat together, we spend time together. But it's the quality of the time, I think, that's different, right? When we have other dates and we have the NRE, we might be putting a lot more energy into planning those dates and getting dressed up and doing that thing. And we still need to bring that energy into all of our relationships. So,
yeah, that's a good point. Well, I heard that the other day with a couple that I'm working with where they said something almost verbatim of what you just said. And the idea, well, I'm here all the time. But their partner was like, you're here physically, but you're checked out otherwise. You're not present, even though you're physically here. And they were able to reflect upon that and recognize it and say, yes, let me avail myself more when I can, and I will make the efforts to do so. But really, the beauty of that was that a need was expressed, it was received, acknowledged, and then they went into an action. How can we then, adjust that?
And doing this relationship review regularly is a great opportunity for that. And then the last step in the radar is to reconnect and reward even. And so reconnect is, now that you've had this discussion, you've created an action plan, there could be some strong feelings, right? So even before you go into it, I always suggest to people that they plan something awesome for after, that really feels like really reconnecting. It feels awesome and something you enjoy doing together that's either special or maybe it's like a regular thing that, you do that feels really close and connected. Like I'm thinking about what some of the things I love to do with you is like cuddle up on the couch and find a really great film noir, make a healthy dinner together and just sit and enjoy that together. Really close. And to me, that feels really connecting. I mean, there's other connecting things I like to do too, but that's a really, even though it's not a going out and painting the town red, it feels really close and connecting. I mean, I enjoy that.
It's as do I. I love those moments. But even if we don't have the luxury of that kind of time, it reminds me of when we would connect simply by holding each other's hand with one hand and putting our hand on the other person's heart and looking to each other's eyes. That is a 3-second exercise, but it can really make you feel reconnected. And granted, if you don't have the luxury of an evening together, for example.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a great, that thing that we do is great for stopping us in the moment if we feel like we're escalating, doing it before we go out or doing it when we are partying or anything. I mean, you're very good at reminding me when I'm feeling like my anxiety or level is escalating and I'm overwhelmed to like stop me and do that reconnection. So I always appreciate that.
And I always appreciate that you're open to my offering that you see that as an invitation of love. And it's also a great way of opening and closing the radar, right? Because we ask people to say that before we start these conversations, we tell each other how much we mean to each other, that we are wanting to be in this. We're not feeling as though we're kind of forcing this conversation, but it's an activity that we see the benefits to. And we want to make each other feel well supported and connected and loved.
Yeah. And that's why the reconnect also has a reward, because any good habit, if you know a lot about creating habits, I'm really big into like you need a reward. And it doesn't have to be anything big. It doesn't have to be a food reward, but like the reward sort of reinforces that habit. So if it feels good and it's going to end well, like you're going to have something to look forward to or feel good about, then I think people are more likely to follow through.
One last point on that, if I may, that is going to end well. Maybe we are having some difficult discussions, but we can have those and they could be emotionally charged, but we can say, okay, well, we're having this discussion, but that doesn't stop me from still caring about you or loving you. And maybe we're kind of arguing, fighting, or having a heated discussion, but then when the bell rings and we say, okay, we've had our time for that, even if it's not yet fully resolved, we will still come back and say, at the end of it, I know we care about each other and we will invite each other to reconnect to something. And it might be difficult at first to do that. I just had a heated discussion. It didn't necessarily go the way I wanted, but we encapsulate that and we are able to compartmentalize it and then come back and say, okay, we still have connection enough to say that we consider each other's feelings, that we want each other to feel well. And it really does then make the invitation for radar that much more accessible. We say, well, it's not going to be such a horrific thing that I never want to go to it. We might have some difficult things to say, but I do feel supported and seen and cared for. as I am offering them as well.
Yeah. And I think that part of your action plan can be if there are specific topics or things that require a bigger discussion, is that you table and plan for that discussion. So you don't feel like you have to have all the things out in that one moment, but you have a place for which to, plan for another discussion where you can have it like fresh with new eyes. So there might be, as part of your action plan, here are some of the other discussions, we'd like to have, in the next week, 2 weeks, that sort of thing, and have those discussions and everything. So.
Well, it reminds me also, again, of when we went back to the idea of tempo and time and timing, right? So we would make it a little bit more mindful and a little bit more digestible in that we will talk about these things, but it's not going to go on for the entirety of the evening per se, right? We are going to be able to block out times where we do feel as though we're coming to it, but when it is too much, we'll take a break from that. Let's bring it back to the holidays.
Yeah, that's perfect. So number 3 is planning as well, but let's do some pre-planning for the where, when, who, how of the holidays. Because if you are looking at the holidays, and I'm air quoting them, as a time limited thing, balancing that time between partners, which is tough even during regular times, might be even more difficult because you may have other obligations with family and friends and work parties and things like that. So one solution for this is doing some planning in advance, but also being creative around that planning. Like we were saying, everything doesn't have to be on one day. How can you make times throughout the month and into the new year for special times with partners? I think some of the things that come up for people, and there's a lot of people that aren't out to family. And so if you're in a relationship where you're married, for example, with kids, where your parents don't know what's going on, then you may not be able to have a partner that you have come to family events and stuff. And that's kind of a hard situation for everybody involved, but sometimes for the person, if they're solo or they're wanting to see you, so that's why saying being creative is important.
Absolutely. It might be difficult for the person who's solo and feeling left out or excluded, but that's not to say that it's going to be easier for the person who had to make those decisions and feels that they're not able to bring 2 or 4 or 6 partners to the Christmas gathering or to the holiday gathering, right? But really, our only chance of navigating this well is to have these open and honest discussions ahead of time.
Yeah. And I think figuring out what would feel good, like talking to people about what their needs are, what would feel good to them if we can't see them in person, for example, like what about a FaceTime, or how can you make the holidays special? So that's why thinking about the where, the when, the who, and the how is super important.
It's interesting, right? When we think about the dynamics of being in a coupled relationship, I guess there's to some extent, an automatic expectation that we're a couple. So we'll go to your parents or to my parents or my family or your parents, and boom, it's one and then the other. But when we are involved in a relationship that has more than one partner, several partners, how does that come to be? How does the whole consideration come into it? And this idea of if there is that hierarchy or not, or are we subscribing to non-hierarchical relationships? But I wonder to that point, when we start dating in January and February, or whenever it is, should we have these holiday discussions first and foremost? So we talk about our desire for some level of emotional investment or not, or our sexual practices or orientation, or we talk about hopefully having conversations about STI testing and good sexual health practices. But should we also be preemptive and talk about, well, how do you play out the holidays? What's that going to be like for you? I happen to already be in a relationship, or I'm not in a relationship, and these are my expectations or not. Should we have these type of discussions well in advance so it's already been invited and explored?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's great. That's a great thing. And, and I think it's good to understand. And, and then you can consent to it. So if you're a solo person dating a couple, or a solo person dating another person who's in another relationship, maybe you don't want to emotionally invest so much if you feel like you're going to end up not being together during times that may be important to you, right? And I know it's a terrible thing to think about at the very beginning when you're excited about someone, but you could save yourself some heartache if people can't commit, or if they'll never come out, or if it's never going to be that you'll be introduced to their family. If that's something that's important to you, if it's something that you value, then, it's something to consider.
I know that I've become contradicting myself, but it makes me laugh at the idea of how would I feel if on our first date, you would have said, well, and by the way, how do you perform during the holidays? I think I would have turned on my heels and run for the hills.
True. Maybe you need to wait a little bit. It's not the first conversation you have.
Maybe not, but I wonder how you would have received it if I would have told you, well, they're just not something that I participate in. Go do your own thing. And then with that consideration, if you would have then found out that it meant you'd probably be alone for it, would that have been acceptable? But the thing is, you would have been invited to either consent to it or not consent to it. You would have had a choice in that.
Yeah, because of your not so love of the holidays, I typically do tend to be by myself. And, in some ways that's awesome because I can just do, the place I've come to is that it can be awesome because I can use that time to see friends and people and do things that I don't normally have time for, maybe. But it also means that sometimes I feel like I wish you were here and I wish you could be there for me. And, I have these weird moments sometimes. I'm like, oh, I'm always alone at Christmas, or whatever, and it's silly, but because I'm not alone, you're still here. You still love me. You still connect with me and all that stuff. But yeah, I don't know what I would have done if I knew that it wasn't something you would want to do. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Alone for the holidays, it doesn't quite fit the Hallmark movies that we watch, right?
You mean I watch?
No, it counters our traditional norms, our expectations, what might have been put on us. The idea of, well, happily ever after, that you would find a partner and they would be there for the holidays. And we're interrupting that. We're saying, well, our dynamic is not that way. Because I don't participate in them, do I now feel any level of responsibility or burden, or should I just simply say, well, I don't really like the holidays, but I'll do it for my partner anyway?
Yeah. And you do that a lot. You do things for me and I appreciate that, but I also don't want you to do things that don't feel good for you and in alignment with your own values. Right. And so it's funny you mentioned this because I was thinking about this morning and I think in anticipation of this talk. And I was thinking, it's interesting. And, a different way of looking at it for me is like when we do holiday stuff with my family, my sister is like, it's my sister and her husband and the kids. And like the focus is spread out amongst them. And then when I go to holidays, it's just about me. So I'm like, maybe it actually is not so bad.
You don't have to share it with somebody.
And I get to like spend some time with my parents and, this kind of ties into this idea where, family doesn't always agree with your relational choices. And that's been a bit of a journey. But for me, over the time since I came out as polyamorous, which, was really tough and wasn't great on you or me and, brought up a lot of feelings over time, these moments that I get to spend with them on my own allows me sort of I don't like the word allow, but, gives me an opportunity to kind of remind them of who I am and that person that I am is still the same. And, I know that, and the place I've come to is that they may never totally understand or accept my choices. So that's the way I can only demonstrate, that I'm still a loving person. I'm still a caring person. That doesn't change, and I think it is getting better. I think it is becoming, they are understanding more and it's just taken some time. And I'm sorry that that's been more difficult on you as the person in a relationship with me.
I'm able to hold that and thank you. But something you said makes me wonder. You say that your parents may never totally understand or accept your choices, but I wonder how you experience their lack of desire for it or inability to express it, what that's like for you as well, or any listeners, the idea that, yes, they may not accept us or our way of being, but how does that then inform us about how we might feel about them if they are somewhat intolerant of it or not knowing the benefits to it or not accepting of it for whatever reasons? And then we have to essentially, I guess we don't really have to, but we kind of lend ourselves to want to be understanding of them. And should they be understanding of us? more of a philosophical question than for right now.
No, it's a good question. And I think since that time, in some ways, I don't see them the same way. And I'm sort of mourning that a bit, and I will try not to cry, but yeah.
But that's a very good point, Tara. I wonder if we ever have really had enough acknowledgement of that, enough space for that to acknowledge what it's been like for you in those feelings and to mourn that aspect of it. Because maybe before it's ever announced, we think our parents are the bee's knees and that they'll always support and love us and understand whatever we do. And then we announce this and we find out, well, no, actually, it is very much counter to what I believe they would be, how they would be. And then we have to hold that. So do we get the time to really sit with those feelings? And could we share it with a loving partner or partners?
Yeah, good point.
Holidays, I feel, are like Miracle Grow for feelings, right? So we'll have some feelings.
Miracle Grow for feelings.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Brings them out and it makes it big, right? So can we find places, safe, secure places to have those feelings, to announce them, to say them aloud, to have them recognized? It's vitally important. We should not have to just own everything and just swallow it and have to contain it. They're big feelings.
That's true. I probably hold and contain a lot more than I should or need to, but I really do. And thank you for your support. I really do try to release that and accept the things that I can and change the things that I can, and then kind of just be okay with the rest.
Like the serenity prayer.
It's the serenity prayer. I know.
Well, it works. It really does, right? But yeah, try and find a supportive partner, try and find a supportive listener, somebody who is really going to allow you space without necessarily having to offer something unless you're asking for it. But, it goes back to our ear or shoulder idea, right? Do you want a shoulder who is just simply going to give you some space and they can kind of carry some of that burden? Or do you want a mouthpiece that's going to also offer you some of their insight and advice to it? And it's for you to say.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely a lesson that we've learned very, very well, is that, and when, we need one or the other thing from our partner, and being able to share that, or asking that, asking the person what you need. And I actually just mentioned that to some friends on Friday night. We were talking about that. And because the one person is, a problem solver, right? And so they really want their person to feel good, and they want to take away the pain. So they immediately jump into action. Whereas what they really need in that moment, and you had to communicate this to me too, because I'm similar, right? I'm like jumping into like, let's solve this, right? Because there's a difficulty in tolerating you being in pain, or suffering. Same with this other person. And so we had this discussion about asking the question, do you want someone just a shoulder to lean on, an ear to listen, or do you want someone to help you solution? And so I think that was a positive discussion.
But it's a wonderful observation that we're able to recognize what feelings it brings up in us when our partner is not doing well and they're suffering, and how we might want to go into action to help alleviate their pain. And that's very altruistic and wonderful. But is it also an indicator of how I am intolerant to my own feelings of discomfort, and I want to move away from that?
That's absolutely it. I don't want to see you in pain, and I also don't want to tolerate the discomfort of seeing you in pain or not being able to help or feeling helpless, right? So yeah, learning, that's part of what we've had to learn. And that leads us well into number 4, which is communicating. And that's a communication when you say what it is you need in the moment. But the holidays are also a good time where you're going to be talking to a lot of people, including your partners and families and friends. And so it's probably a good time to remind yourself and refresh your communication skills, like your nonviolent communication method or the attunement communication method, which we teach in our programs. And, the holidays can sometimes bring out the not so great in us because we're tired. We've overeaten. We might be lonely, angry. And so we might engage in some destructive patterns like this: mind reading, labeling, personalizing. There's a whole list of them in our program. Yes, butting and doing all these things, kitchen sinking because we're overwhelmed or overdone or whatever it is. And then really leaning into engaging in more effective communication practices. And this is one of the slides as well from our program, being empathetic, holding space, listening and reflect, active listening, super important, sharing thoughts and feelings. And the last one on this list I like is like staying focused on one thing at a time. If you're going to have big discussions, have a big discussion on one thing and not try to do everything, like kitchen sinking, because it's just going to cause more difficulty and sorting through. And finally, number 5 is make sure you have your toolkit, build your toolkit, have it at hand, and ask for help when needed. Be aware of what your needs are over the holidays and get what you need to support you through that. Don't wait until January and put it off, because things can get aggravated over the holidays. And so it's important to get support that you need. And that can be support from like-minded individuals in the community. So, joining a group like ours or another one and having discussions, listening to podcasts like this one. And there's a lot of them, other ones out there as well. It might be a great time to enroll in a course that you can take bits and pieces of and learn if you have any time over the holidays. And of course, I would say our newbies course is an amazing one. It's 7 modules. It's everything all in one, which is super helpful. But there's also, depending on what your needs are, there's other ones out there that might be suitable for you that will help you get some support you need. So jump in and don't put off dealing with some of these things,
Tara, it makes me think of how it is. It's unfortunate for some people, but they find it very difficult to ask for what they need or ask for help. Maybe there's considerations of vulnerability or whatever it is. But really, once we do ask for help, not only do we find out that it is generally survivable and we can get some of the help, but we should also keep in mind that many people love to help. It makes people feel good to be able to help. So if you are one of those people that find it difficult to help, don't be. Just ask for it and then turn over the results. And you never know. You might actually get something besides a lump of coal. You might actually get love and support that is out there for you, but also you're giving the other person an opportunity to be loving and supportive as well. And you can as well be called on as well.
Perfect. So, so through the holidays, we talked about 5 things you can do. So part of that is making plans in advance, which will help you figure out how you're spending your time and doing that, doing your relationship reviews, communicating, connecting with partners, finding ways of connecting with partners, even if when you can't be with them. So you can use technology where needed, online video chats, web-enabled sex toys, text calls, anything to stay connected. And, if you have a partner you're not going to be close with, find out what their needs are, what would make them feel special and awesome over the holidays. And I think for yourself, it's important, and I need to remind myself of this too, is take time to rest. Don't overcommit. So still do all the things that you normally do that make you feel good. You and I are doing Get Better in December in the health and fitness program that I'm in. And so that means like still getting up Monday to Friday, doing those workouts and taking care of self-care and feeling good and eating well over the holidays is super helpful. Yeah, but not overcommitting to social commitments and burning yourself out over the holidays is super important. Learn to say no. And then don't forget to prioritize and plan for fun and sexy times over the horny days, as I think you called it once.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So that's it for this podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you, André. That was awesome.
Everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and have a great holiday season, or whenever you're listening to this, have a great day.
Thank you.
If you want to have secure, satisfying, and sexy relationships, check out our Poly Newbies digital course. It's 7 modules of all you need in one place. And as a thank you to our listeners, we're offering it at an exclusive price. Link is in the show notes, plus all the other awesome things we talked about today. Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast with T&A. Don't forget to subscribe and give us some love on your favorite podcasting platform. You can check out the show notes for any of the links to the courses or information we talked about today. Thanks, and have a fantastic and sexy day.